Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be in Stockholm for tone of winter to come, hopefully for all of us, unless we get a climate change here. I'm also delighted to talk about the impact of lower fossil fuel prices on renewable energy. As most of you who have been around for some time know, there is a direct, in the past, in the last 35 years, there has been a direct correlation between oil and particular fossil fuel prices in general and enthusiasm for renewable energy. Whenever there was an event, whether it was another Chernobyl, Fukushima, Three Miles Island, there was also a oil price increase, and lo and behold, a lot of investment and enthusiasm for renewable. And the oil price came down, and within very short time, investment in renewable were put on ice. It didn't go away entirely, but it certainly slowed over the last 30 years, and we had exactly the boom and bust cycles of which Bjarne had just spoken. I'm here today to tell you this time it's different. And this time is different. The question is, of course, why? And let me tell you right away, I am not one of those renewable missionaries who tries to have an eye on wishful thinking. I'm an economist and policy veteran, and at least try to be analytic and objective. But it looks as if it is really different this time. So before I go into more detail why I believe, at least, that this time it is different, let me have a quick snapshot where we stand with renewable energy. As you see here, globally, renewable energy contributes only 14% to total primary energy supply, of which half is traditional. Dung, straw, waste in developing countries. So a mere 7%. However, in the last 15 years, it has grown for the first time since 1900 faster than overall fossil fuel and supply of energy. 22% is global electricity generation, of which 70 were wrong. Of which I'm looking of which 75% is hydropower, and the rest is biomass. Road transport, and you already alluded to it, is a mere 3 to 4%, and modern heating only 7%. In Europe, we are doing a little bit better, 24% in total primary energy supply, of which, totally different than in the rest of the world, 64% is biomass and waste, of course thanks to the Scandinavian countries, and 16% is hydro. However, the growth in Europe has been quite phenomenal, namely compared to 2.2% worldwide. It has grown in Europe since 2003 by 6.3%. 25, now I'm again getting the wrong thing. Yeah. 25% is electricity, and we have in Europe 5.4% in transport. I have given you also the Swedish number, and you will see immediately you are off the chart. Totally different than anyone else, namely 55% of total energy consumption, electricity 62%, and transport fuel 18%. A mixture of excellent resources, but also a wise policy framework. When I looked again at the Swedish policies and country book which the IEA brings out, I was really impressed and jealous. I wish we would have been able to do it in Germany as efficiently as you have done. Maybe we still have a chance. But what you see when you look at the status quo is there are large differences around countries, and there are large differences in technology, with hydro and biomass being at the forefront. But you see also one thing, namely that by now the investment in renewable energy is $300 billion US per year. That is equivalent to the capex of the 10 largest oil and gas companies and the 10 largest oil companies. So renewable energy, just from an investment point of view, no matter how much it costs to put the solar panels on, are substantial. It's no longer a niche market. Just the contrary, it is there, and there is an industry which has come to a certain kind of maturity. Let me now come to the next point, to the main point, and the question is really how price sensitive is supply and demand for renewables in 4 very different markets. Electricity, of course, heating and cooling, both residential and industrial process heat, then in the transport sector, and last but not least in the rural area and its isolated areas which we have all over the world. We have this kind of issue which we have to ask ourselves, because what are the drivers for renewable in general and in these very different markets, and how price sensitive are they then? And it's very clear that there are 3 totally different drivers. The first driver is location, natural endowments, therefore you have all these hydroelectricity plants, you have the possibility for solar and otherwise, and then you have policies, goals and mandates. And you have economics, the usual kind which we have always had. Now when you look at policies, goals and mandates which are driving renewable energy today, in addition to cost competitiveness, you see 2 major changes from the past. We have always had R&D. Everyone was doing some R&D in this area. We now have, for renewables, R&D, the usual research development, but you also have quite a bit of deployment policies and then diffusion policies well into market adoption, because you need system integration. The more renewables you have, the more you have to make sure that they are really integrated in the system. Whether this is transport for green energy for the cars, or whether it is deployment of a high percentage of variable renewables in an electricity network. So suddenly, these subsidies don't stop at R&D, as the economists believe, but it goes down all the line, well beyond the 33% wind which you have at the moment in Denmark, or the 25% which you have in Germany. Then you have, like always, industrial policy. Many countries have special industrial policies in order to do renewables, electric cars, you name it. It is for most large countries, industrialized countries, as well as emerging economies, a priority. This is not new. What is, however, new, is that we do renewable energy for pollution, environmental, and climate goals. 40% of the IDNCs which have been submitted for Paris have specific renewable energy goals with which they want to have the CO2 goals maintained or improved over time. Energy security was always a problem, but country-specific energy mix decisions, which by design include a certain portion of renewable energy, is something new we haven't really seen in the past years. So the real question for renewable energy is not whether supply and demand is price sensitive, but whether the policies, mandates, goals are price sensitive. And when you think about the world, and those people who really want to have additional energy, you immediately come to a situation where you can group the world in 5 different kind of types. And let me go through the types and give some kind of indication how price sensitive the different kind of policies in these countries are. You have, up front there, countries with renewable energy priority decisions. It's nearly in their DNA by now that they want to do renewable energy. You look at Denmark, you look at Germany, you look what Brazil did 30 years ago with ethanol, you look even at Sweden to a certain extent. They all have the ability, the willingness to pay. Price sensitivity to oil prices close to zero. Germany is not going to change its energy vendor only because the oil price is going to come down. They are committed to certain kind of objectives. They might fiddle around plus minus 10%, but overall, these are priority decisions. Then there's a group of countries, and I would say the EU 28, the biofuels target of the US for 2020, the Japanese targets after Fukushima, and the targets for California, so 30% renewables in the electricity sector by 2020 and 50% by 2030. These are medium objectives, which took such a long time to get there, to unravel these objectives. In short term, they are not price sensitive. They are there to stay, and at least in the medium term, whether the oil price goes up and down, they will continue. The third group is, however, a totally different group than what we have in the past seen in the OECD country. These are countries with growing energy demand, but they also have growing industrial and technology aspiration. And they see renewable energy as a basis for employment and advancement to produce energy at home. They also, to a large extent, want to control pollution and get their greenhouse gas targets under control. And there you have China, India, Brazil, Chile, Turkey, Mexico, South Africa. They all want to be part of this technology and create at home an industry, being independent either from oil and gas supplies or from components from developed countries. So, and where will the demand really come? We are only restructuring. We have basically flat energy demand in the OECD countries, or only very small demand, and it's an issue to restructure our economy. But the real demand is here. In addition to these objectives of industrial growth, of pollution control, there is very clearly here also a question of portfolio management. They will do renewables because they need it all. They will continue to need coal and gas and probably also oil, but they also, and of course nuclear, but they want to have for portfolio risk assessment a diversified growth portfolio. So here you will see most of the renewable demands of the next 10 years. Are they going to change this portfolio and industrial development approach, including renewable, in the next 10 years, where we aren't quite sure whether we are really in this boom and bust cycle or not? No. They have, when you look at China, 2020, another 100 gigawatt of solar, another 200 gigawatt of wind, another 50 gigawatt of hydro. They do it because they need the kind of electricity, and they want to, as you say in German, dance on all weddings. So they will want to also do renewable and at the same time, of course, develop a local industry which hopefully can also compete internationally. Then you have other countries which have industrial aspiration like Australia, the US, these are the Gulf countries, who never are quite sure whether they of course want to do it because everyone does this technology, so they don't want to be left behind. Therefore, they will also invest in R&D and in installation, but they have always this focus on competitiveness. And when I just in a minute will talk about the US, they're not quite sure really whether one should continue to subsidize renewable or not. So this is a on and off kind of support for renewables. So the one which isn't quite sure, and Australia, and you, Joshua, probably will know, big announcement and off again. It seems to be never quite sure whether they want to do renewable energy, so I'm sure with the gas prices coming down, it's the last we have seen of all the solar energy in Australia. So this is the only group we have discussed right now which will be a little bit price sensitive. Then there are the developing countries. And in the developing countries, we see a very interesting trend. In the developing countries, it is an issue of financing. Most of the developing banks have long stopped to finance oil, gas, and coal. So the financing which is available either through development banks, through most countries' development agencies, or through the climate funds, and there are now quite substantial financing available, or through the Kyoto mechanisms in the last 5 years, it's all renewables. So you have one group which has its doubt, where you would say, yes, this is sensitive. But all the others are unlikely to change their policies in the medium term, even if we see another 5 years of low oil prices. So the price sensitivity of these policies, which were always changed within 18 months of lower prices, have not budged. In many countries, they are not even discussed. So we have here a medium-term insensitivity to price changes in the fossil fuel area. I don't want to give you the impression that economics do not matter. They do. But it is just one of the factors and part of the economics in renewables, which I would like to highlight, is not just cost competitiveness of per ton or per kilowatt hour, but one of the big issues has always been for renewable energy access to finance. The other is cost competitiveness, but then this whole issue of industry dynamic. How mature is this industry? And do we really have an internationally or country-specific, well-established, mature supply chain? This is not a question which you ask in oil and gas, it's there. But in renewables, it hasn't been there, with the exception of hydropower. So it was always an issue, what is the risk? Let me first talk about access to financing, and because it shows the particularity of the economics of renewable energy, because access to financing was a risk. And we are now really at a tipping point. It was a risk because the ownership structure. Oil and gas, you have the large companies, they have a lot of cash flow, they hardly had to rely on debt financing. Most of the renewable energy financing, however, were small companies, were independent power providers, were a different kind of ownership structure, which just didn't have the financing or the background to take on a lot of debt. What therefore had been happening is that the development banks internationally have come in, but in Europe and in Japan, also the commercial and savings bank. The US was a total fiasco because the entire renewable revolution, which they had at one point in time, was financed over tax equities. 2008 came and all the tax equity was gone. There was none, so no financing for renewable energy. They have now started special financial engineering instruments, for example, the yield pool, in order to have a reliable stream of financing for renewable energy. And of course, here you see the green bonds, the institutional investors, the clean energy funds, the green climate funds, new instruments which have access to debt financing for renewable investments, even in an early and relatively risky stage of demonstration and deployment. This is a development of the last 5 years, after 2008, where both the developing countries and the developed countries have an adequate financing structure so that investments can continue. How is the situation when you only look at costs? There are two different perspectives we have to look at when we look at the cost comparison for renewable energy. So first is the present cost, but then there is a likely future cost. Why are we spending all this money on solar PV? Because one believes with increasing growth there is a potential of bringing costs down substantially. And of course, because of competition and production in China, this has actually happened over the last couple of years. But the likelihood that through technological investments you will go even 200-300% lower, or you will sooner or later go away from modules into photosynthesis, is at least on the horizon. And the same is true for wind. Not so much for biomass, but even in hydro there is still a potential of 20-30% cost reduction. But it's not just the production cost, but it is this issue of system cost. Today, to give you an example, China is the second largest wind energy producer in the world, and it's 2% of their total electricity. For China to add 200 gigawatt to their grid requires not much system cost. It's a load management cost. Because even after adding 200 gigawatt, it will be 4% with all the backup electricity being in hydro and nuclear and of course in coal. In Germany, however, where it's 12% at the moment, in order to have the system cost under control, when Germany finally will be at 25%, these are massive investments. So when you look at the competitiveness of renewable electricity, for example, in a country, it's also always an issue of the actual cost, of the future cost reduction, and then the likely system cost, in order to see whether expansion really makes sense. The second issue is the issue that a lot of the value of the electricity, for example, the more variable electricity from wind and solar you feed in, the smaller gets the value to the system. The value also is how a country wants to put its risk portfolio of generation really together. So most countries, or let me go back, when I was young, everyone was thinking by now we would have 100% nuclear energy. Anyone who tells me now we will have 100% renewables, like most or some of the research institutions in Germany say, I point to my experience with 100% of nuclear power. The likelihood is zero, is that we will have 100% renewables, because most countries look at their portfolio for electricity generation like an investor does at his investment portfolio. Namely, they make a risk assessment, and therefore, yes, they might do 30%, they might do 50%, depending on their endowments. But the value is a question of the portfolio risk assessment. Yes, we will have growth, but whether it will be 100%, it is very different. Then you have this issue of maturity, and for a very long time, neither solar nor wind was really a mature technology, nor did it have a supply chain which was really mature and had competition on the international level. This is still to come, and with that, of course, cost reduction. But you have something which is very special to renewable, namely that we have huge differences between the cost by country. It's not only resources, the quality of resources, and Brazil has just done an auction for electricity. Everyone was thinking with all this bagasse, it will be, of course, biomass. And who won? Wind. Wind was the cheapest in Brazil. No one had expected that through auction really wind would win out, but there's no wind really capacity yet, and wonderful positions. This was the result. The example of the fact that costs for renewables will always be country-specific is the mere fact that to install a photovoltaic installation at the moment in the United States costs twice as much as in Germany. And they are all using the same Chinese modules. So the costs which really matters are not the internationally traded commodities, because competition will drive this down, and probably we will have to get used to the fact that, like the chips, also PV modules will not be produced in Europe or in the United States, but in the long term in some Asian country, which has by now cornered 85% of the market already. It is the balance of system cost, the installation, the service cost, and so-called soft cost, permitting, financing, how long it takes, and that comes in the end to the fact that solar PV in Germany is half as expensive than in the United States. Will it always be like that? Maybe not double as expensive, but there will always be a major premium. There is a totally different installation culture in the United States than in Germany. And Americans generally want to sell their houses every 3 years. So they will have intermediaries who have a leasing arrangement, and of course they will also want to have a 30% return on their installation. So the soft costs will, in addition to the quality of the resources, make major differences between countries. So the last point when it comes to the industry maturity, you will have internationally traded components, but the attraction of renewable energy for so many countries is that a large percentage of the value chain can be handled within the country. These are the local costs. That's somewhere between 50 and 80%, depending on the country. So countries which are now emerging countries, from India to China to Morocco, basically do renewable energy for industrial and employment reasons. And that will continue in the future also. Let me now come to give you a few examples. Just one, China I already quickly spoke about. The targets are so high for our vantage point, 200 gigawatt of wind, and the oversupply of wind turbines, of large builders of renewable energy installation, and the oversupply of modules is so large that these targets are going to be met. So again, industrial policy is probably as important as it's a case of China, of course, pollution. When it comes to heating, some of you might know that China is already has 75% of the world's hot water market. And to put this further into residential heating is absolutely no problem. On top of it are the local gas prices so high that this gas and renewable competition will not happen in the next 5 years in China. This being said, you have a totally different situation in the US. As you know, the gas prices are very low. When you therefore see the electricity sector and the pollution standards or the climate change standards, which at least the Obama government has posted for Paris, you see that it will not be renewable energy which will do this, but it will be fuel switching between gas and coal. The renewable energy is attack and war. Probably some of the tax advantages will not be removed, depending who will be the next government in the United States. And it will be only lonely California with its 50% renewable energy target for 2030. I nevertheless have to warn you, this sounds very good, but they can import hydropower from Canada for 2 cents. So a lot will be low-cost wind from Mexico and low-cost water hydro from Canada. And with that, you can make a very balanced electricity network, in addition to, of course, some additional in construction in California itself. So the US will be the most price-sensitive kind of area, particularly in heating. I don't expect in the heating sector in the US much to happen. And I also am really concerned that the new mandates in the United States for biofuels might be very weak. This is really dependent on the next government and, of course, on the agricultural lobby. But here, substantially more investment is needed. At the moment, DARPA, the Defense Department, has led some of the research into biofuels, but no one knows what will happen beyond 2022. So there is a huge investor uncertainty in the US, and one will have to see what happens after the election. Let me quickly talk about India. India is a very special case. Well, in Europe, we have the European objectives. We have now 27% renewable energy by 2030. I did probably, Joshua, you are closer than I am. Whether these will be renegotiated, I doubt it. It's so difficult to negotiate anything that somehow we will all fit into these objectives. India is a totally different question, because India continues to do coal and do a lot of coal, and will probably import all the cheap coal which will come on the market. They have, like China, fantastic renewable energy targets on solar and wind, which I consider, in contrast to China, as stretch target. Why? They haven't built up a local industry yet. And they have had a lot of trouble since they have set up these objectives to get their industry up to speed. Obviously, they don't want to import the renewable energy, they want to build it at home. So while there is a continuous flow on biofuel, and there is quite a bit also on biogas, because there's so much waste which can be done in a decentralized way. In the end, India will be the last one to comply and think about the climate change objective. And I don't know whether they already submitted targets, but the last thing I heard, they haven't even submitted targets yet. So because they are wedded so much to coal. And while they are trying to have an industrial policy, it will take another 10 years. Let me now wrap up by looking at the price sensitivity and where we are beyond in the next 10 years. To 2020, I think we are on autopilot. But there are some minor areas where there might be a slowdown. So autopilot is definitely in electricity, where this whole deployment and diffusion and market introduction policies, which are in place and are of a totally different nature in every country, but cannot be easily undone, will continue. There will be an attempt, and in particular in Germany, it already has been in the UK, and certainly in the US, to somehow make these incentives as minimize them, particularly when it comes to public payment, and to encourage competition. But we will have, particularly in Europe, but also in the United States, a continuation of this rather intensive research and development investment in storage and system integration. And that is important not only for electricity, but also for cars. So this entire storage R&D interest, everyone is enthusiastic about it, will at least go on until 2020. Thereafter, I think all bets are off. But it is a major new initiative because large amounts of renewable energy can only be used in the electricity system if we do something about integration into the net and have better storage. And of course the same is true in some way in the car area. However, in some countries we will have renewable deferral. You see it already in the United States because of the coal-gas switching. We are really deferring wind investment in a larger way, and the Gulf states have basically gutted their solar program entirely. How is it in the heating and cooling and industrial process sector? We have mandates in some countries, not very many. They will continue until 2020, but new policies, there is a hands-off discussion at the moment. I'm also not quite sure what the EU will do. They had hoped to bring out new heating standards the next year, and I would assume that the countries will make sure that they drag their feet. But Joshua, you are again closer to that. And they will delay it until one sees clearer how the gas prices developed. And here it's not the oil prices, but it is the gas price. And the gas price expectation will influence a lot of decisions, like in the United States, particularly in the industrial process heat. But also countries who are not as endowed with good biomass as the Scandinavian countries, it's not so clear whether one really has to go into biomass or solar heating in the residential areas, but one will want to wait and see and probably defer investments. In the transport fuel, we will have in the next 5 years a very strange dynamic. Because on the one hand, we have now the revised European guidance, we have revised procedures in blending mandates in the United States, which go until 2020. But we have really quite a bit of biofuel growth in developing countries. And that comes because they started with mandates around 10 years after the OECD countries did. And they have still so much locally available waste that it is China, it is India, it's Indonesia, it will be Malaysia, which will bring the biofuel growth over and above the mandates which we have here. And I expect also that at least the funded advanced biofuel R&D programs through DARPA in the United States, in Europe, will continue. at least until 2020. The developing countries, the access to renewable energy financing will do everything. Whenever I go to any of the oil and gas discussions, all the gas people, and you will probably know more about it, tell me there's a future in sending all these LNG cargoes which do not find a market in Europe or in Asia will go to the middle-income countries, to Vietnam, to Nigeria, to Sierra Leone, to Ghana, all over Africa. The only thing I can say is bring your own financing, because these countries will have financing to do renewable energy. And if the gas industry wants to push gas on middle-income countries, they have to finance this kind of supply. How do I see the time after 2020? If indeed there are lower prices and the bubble will not burst before 2020, there will be a reassessment. But again, as I said before, it will start with this issue, of country type. In which kind of group do you belong? Are you really committed to a certain kind of renewable areas, or have a large demand? And what is your energy decision? And then, very clearly, do you need renewable energy for pollution or climate change targets? And many, many countries will do renewable energy, a larger percentage, doubling, tripling, or even quadrupling, no matter what the price will be, in order to comply with these targets, or in the case of China, India, Mexico, because of pollution. A thing which we don't have anymore to that extent, and recently there is, of course, also Indonesia. Then there is the question, what kind of progress in costs and technology will we do in the next 5 years? We can assume that additional growth of the industry and competition will bring costs down, not only in the fossil fuel industry, but also in the other areas. Then, last and least, I think the first three factors are the most important factors, even for a reassessment in 2020, is the longer-term fossil fuel price. And there I see as important for Europe and for the growth market, which is Asia, not so much the oil price, but the gas price. Because the gas price has been in these two markets double or triple or quadruple what it has been in the United States. So if indeed we will have a competitive gas price in Europe after 2020, certain investments in all four markets will go slow. Because then the same kind of dynamic which you have like in the United States for pollution and for climate change reason, there will be some substitution of coal and gas, and then gas can be a bridge fuel. As you probably know, we have been talking about gas as bridge fuel for the last 10 years. It hasn't come about. In Germany, most of the gas plants are being shut down because it's not anymore needed. One has enough renewables and, of course, coal. So there is really the question whether gas can really play this bridge fuel issue. And they will, both in Asia and in Europe, if the gas price comes down and if we get a reasonably competitive gas price. So even 2020, I believe that the expansion of renewable in the electricity sector is locked in. Not totally independent of prices in the fossil fuel area, but substantially independent. The area, however, which is a big unknown, is the approach beyond 2020 to the transport sector and the substitution of oil. Because in that area, still quite a lot of research and development and deployment, both of fossil fuel, of green hydrogen for fuel cells, as well as having sufficient green electricity in our own overall system to really go forward with the substitution of oil in the transport sector. And there, I believe it is important to do substantial additional investment in all options, from biofuel to hydrogen, green hydrogen, but also produce enough CO2, non-fossil fuel electricity to make the electric car a real option, not only a pretend option in most countries. And there, of course, Sweden and Norway are very different from the rest of the world. The rest of the world does not have green electricity, just the contrary. So the big open, and there I think I even say the same thing that you do, is how quickly this substitution of oil will happen, and the low price may well do what has always happened with renewable energy, that governments are not really prepared to push this research and development in substitutes for oil further for the transport sector. Thank you so much.